My celebrity boyfriend had his scandal exposed, and it was found out that he had 8 romantic partners. As a result, I wasn't among those 8. Before I could even have the chance to confront this scumbag, a global zombie outbreak occurred. A week later, with all ammunition and food supplies exhausted, I was put into a pot and steamed, accompanied by the fragrant aroma of cooking wine, salt, scallions, ginger, and garlic. I was reborn from the ashes. The person who was holding the ladle had their positions reversed. More and more zombies pounced towards me, and the intense pain gnawed at every nerve of mine. Fear and despair kept spreading until they completely enveloped me. Jingle bell. The sound of the alarm clock rang out, and I was suddenly jolted awake. I sat up straight in bed, cold sweat soaked through my clothes, and my hair stuck wetly to my face. I must have looked extremely dejected at that moment. But I didn't have the time to care about it. Without bothering to put on my shoes, I ran barefoot to look for my phone that was tossed among the messy clothes. Honey, what's wrong? You're not sleeping in the middle of the night. Aren't you tired enough yet? Dennis's deliberately lowered bubble voice came from behind, and the words he said were greasy and disgusting. It was obvious that he had deeply ingrained the little wolf dog persona that the company had arranged for him in the past. I would just laugh off this persona, but now I think it's incredibly accurate. Dennis is truly an ungrateful wretch, and he's really despicable, yes, and he's still young. Every word fits him perfectly, remembering the way he walked towards me with a knife and an axe, grinning ferociously as he wanted to chop me up and put me in the pot. I suddenly felt a wave of nausea and retched. In fact, I really did vomit. Clutching my phone, I ran to the bathroom and vomited until I felt dizzy. After rinsing my mouth, I splashed some cold water on my face and checked the time displayed on my phone again. It was 3:35 a.m. on April 17, 2058. The lingering pain in my body reminded me that all of that wasn't a dream. I was back, 3 days before the zombie outbreak. When I had calmed down and dragged my weak body out of the bathroom, Dennis was already half sitting on the bed. He deliberately exposed a large part of his chest and looked at me suggestively. Honey, I was so tired just now. Don't I deserve a reward? I've taken a fancy to a pair of sneakers. Before he could finish his words, I couldn't help but interrupt him. Is something that only takes a few seconds really that tiring? As expected, Dennis's face darkened. I had never been so straightforward with Dennis about this matter before, because in the past, I loved him and cared about his feelings. I accompanied him for a full 7 years. From when he was just a poor wage earner to now when he has become an unknown and unsuccessful celebrity. He used to have a strong drive, being poor but with lofty aspirations. Now, all he has is his good looks, and the rest is full of calculation, philistinism, and hypocrisy. Perhaps because he was still thinking about those sneakers, Dennis somehow managed to hold back his anger and crawled towards me with a forced smile. Honey, what's wrong? Are you angry that I didn't care about you just now? I made a gesture to stop him and took 2 steps back to distance myself from Dennis. Don't come closer, I just vomited, and there's still a smell on me. As expected, Dennis stopped right there. This bastard suddenly developed intermittent cleanliness in the past 2 years. In other words, it's a kind of opportunistic cleanliness. He can't tolerate even the slightest smell from me, but for his agent, Eloise, he can go beyond the limits of human tolerance. This Eloise is basically a top-notch person at making empty promises. She usually instills in Dennis the power of connections and the unspoken rules of the entertainment industry, and this fool Dennis actually believes it. He always thinks that as long as he serves her well, he can become famous and successful. No matter how many times I told him to calm down and work hard, to study, he wouldn't listen. Instead, he would laugh at me for being naive. In my previous life, when the zombie outbreak happened, Dennis came to my house to recuperate for some reason, and Eloise came along too. This despicable couple ate and drank my things, and in the end, because of the food shortage, they set their sights on me. They drugged me. If I hadn't used up my last bit of strength and would rather jump off the building and feed myself to the zombies than let them have their way, I might have really become their food. Remembering the despair at that time, I wish I could kill this ungrateful and insensible beast right in front of me. However, in a society ruled by law, everything has to follow the procedures. What's more, heaven has given me another chance. Instead of directly killing them, I want them to taste the pain I've endured. No, I want them to pay it back double. 3. How could I dislike you? I don't even have enough time to feel sorry for you. As if making up his mind about something. Dennis suddenly leaned towards me, undaunted by difficulties. This was something I didn't expect. Of course, I'm not naive enough to think that he suddenly changed his nature and discovered my goodness. Instead, I believe that there must be something fishy when things seem abnormal. This bastard must have some ulterior motives, and most likely, it's not just about a pair of shoes. Honey, I just remembered. The demolition compensation for that house of yours in the urban village should arrive in the next couple of days, right? Sure enough, in terms of disappointing me, Dennis never fails to do so. Looking back, he had said this before, but it was the next morning. It seems that my sudden awakening in the middle of the night somehow accelerated the progress of the events a bit. Not yet, I asked the bank, and they said it will arrive in 3 days. In fact, the money was already in my card. But I would never give it to him like I did in my previous life and let him spend it on God knows what. Thinking of this, I'm really curious about how this bastard spent such a large sum of money. 3 days later, Dennis stepped back a bit disappointedly, and his face immediately fell. He's really a master at changing his expression. In the past, I might have been a bit nervous and would have quickly tried to comfort him when he was unhappy, but now, whether he's happy or not, I just want him to die as soon as possible. I'm a bit tired, you can leave first. I kicked the clothes he had thrown under the bed, making it very clear that I was asking him to leave. Dennis finally noticed my change, but before he could open his mouth, I started my act. If you don't leave now, you'll have to leave tomorrow morning, otherwise, you'll be photographed. It's too early for you to get up, and it will be so tiring. If Eloise knows that you came to my place, she will definitely scold you. I don't want you to be scolded by her. Send me the link to the shoes, and I'll buy them for you. They're probably going to arrive in about 3 days. I played the coquettish act and made empty promises, all neatly arranged. 2 minutes later, Dennis left my house in a rather clumsy manner. The moment the door closed, I immediately took out my phone and started shopping on JD, all choosing the next day delivery option, barrels of water, instant noodles, snail rice noodles, bread, soy milk powder, black sesame paste, snacks, etc. These are all the things I like. 90 compressed biscuits, dried meat, chocolate bars, dried fruits, canned fruits, etc. These have a long shelf life, take up little space, and are convenient to handle and store. Toilet paper, disinfectant, quilts, winter clothes, power banks, hand warmers, electric blankets, flashlights, etc. These are all things that might be useful in daily life. In addition, I also bought several drones, high-powered binoculars, and various monitoring and listening devices. These are my future safety guarantees and sources of mental entertainment. Without them, how could I watch and listen to the reality show of Dennis and Eloise in the apocalypse? After finishing all these, I went to check the rental information online. Although this house isn't small, since Dennis and Eloise already know about it, it means it's not safe. The occupancy rate of the community I'm currently in isn't particularly high. I originally wanted to rent a house in the opposite building, but after looking around, I didn't find anything suitable. Instead, in the building I'm in, the 2 top-floor apartments are available for rent. This kind of large single-family apartment on each floor has higher privacy and security. This building has a total of 12 floors. I'm currently living on the 3rd floor, and the 10th floor hasn't been sold yet. It's just perfect for me to rent the 11th and 12th floors. Moreover, the 12th floor has a large rooftop that can be used for planting or raising things. In addition, I also made a detailed plan before dawn, including the purchase of medicines, house renovation, energy conversion, etc. At 8:30 a.m., I rushed into the pharmacy downstairs. Besides common medicines like cold medicine, anti-inflammatory drugs, and vitamins, I also stocked up on a lot of regular medicines for my old health problems. I dragged 2 suitcases of medicines home and put them away, and then immediately rushed downstairs to discuss the rental matters. Since I paid the money promptly, the contract was signed smoothly. Before long, I got the keys. Half an hour later, the agreed construction team arrived at my house. Not this one, it's the 11th and 12th floors. Replace all the main doors as a whole, with safety and firmness as the main considerations. install an additional door 3 meters away from the main door, and it needs to have an anti-theft net, replace all the windows with bulletproof glass and apply one-way see-through film, help install surveillance cameras in the corridors and safety passages. There should be no blind spots, make a regional plan for the rooftop. I want to do some planting and breeding. I rattled on a lot, and the foreman looked a bit stunned. Don't worry about either the material costs or the labor costs. I won't default on the payment. Instead, I'll pay a part of it in advance. I have only one requirement: finish it within 2 days. If it's done well and meets the quality standards, I'll give an additional 30% of the project payment as a bonus. Anyway, I'm not short of money. With my last sentence, the foreman suddenly understood everything and even gave a lot of useful suggestions, just after chatting with the foreman. I turned around and entered the room. Dennis's phone call came through. Honey, I'm in trouble. Here's what happened. Stop talking. I understand. I'll transfer a little money to you. After saying that, I hung up the phone and opened Instagram to make a transfer. I entered the amount of 0.01 yuan. I said a little, and it's really just a little. Even though it's just a little, I still feel pained. Why is the transfer limit only up to 2 decimal places? After all, I still gave too much. 5. After doing all these, I calculated the time difference. My best friend Aubrey, who is overseas, should almost be awake at this time, and her precious phone is probably turned on too. Unexpectedly, before I could call her, she sent me a piece of news first. Weibo trending topic. The real octopus, an unpopular celebrity, is in a relationship and has 8 partners at the same time. Then, the phone rang. Lynn, have you seen the news? That bastard Dennis actually dared to cheat, besides you. He's been in a relationship with 7 other people. He's a master of time management. No wonder his career is failing. It turns out that the useless guy spent all his energy on this. The most famous he's ever been in his life is today, an unpopular celebrity's relationship, getting on the headlines just by the number of partners. The comment section is full of people asking who he is. Then, there came the standard swear words. Aubrey cursed very vulgarly and incidentally showed me her rich vocabulary. By the way, among the chat records exposed in the news, which one is you? Why are you even using a secondary account to date? I don't recognize the profile picture at all. Facing Aubrey's curiosity, I was silent for a moment and then replied calmly, none of them is me. I'm the 9th shadowy lover. 3 seconds later, Aubrey's burst of laughter made my ears ache. Sorry, I've received strict training. No matter how funny something is, I won't laugh, unless, I can't help it. Ha 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 ha. After the hearty laughter subsided, Aubrey finally calmed down from her overly joyful mood, and I quickly explained the current situation to her. It's not realistic for her to return to the country now, not to mention that plane tickets are hard to get. Even if she manages to get one, she will have to be quarantined upon arrival, and that would make her situation even more dangerous. First, I told Aubrey everything I could remember, and then I shared with her the survival guide that I made overnight. Aubrey and I have known each other for many years, so she naturally understands that I wouldn't joke about such a thing. She immediately became serious. After ending the call, I went upstairs to make sure that the construction workers had started their work. Then I checked the time and rushed straight to the security booth downstairs. It was the time for the security guards to change shifts, and I quickly found 2 community security guards who were about to get off work. I handed them 2 bottles of water and 2 packs of cigarettes, and then stuffed a few hundred-yuan red envelope into each of their hands. I smiled and said, guys, I bought a lot of things online. I'm a girl and don't have the strength to move them. And I'm in a hurry to go out now. Could you please do me a favor? Money makes the world go round. And no one hit someone with a smiling face. They took the things, looked at me, and patted their chests to promise that they would put everything in order. Of course, I understand that letting others know that I'm stockpiling a large amount of goods will pose a potential safety hazard, but the thing is, I won't be living in that house later. Just a reality show starring Dennis and Eloise would be too boring. I have to find some supporting characters, right? After finishing all these, looking at the bunch of missed calls from Dennis on my phone, I finally clicked to call back. Come out, let's meet. 6. Since there's construction work going on at home, if I want to meet Dennis, I naturally have to choose another place. I was very thoughtful, and found a hotel near the crew where Dennis was working. Since the news about him had just broken out not long ago, there were a lot of fans and paparazzi around. I booked a room in advance and then went in to set up the surveillance cameras. Only then did I send the room number to Dennis and wait for him to come. During the time I was waiting for Dennis to come, according to the position of the cameras, I selected the doorway as the best shooting angle and set up the stage there. Fortunately, Dennis didn't let me down. He probably had a rehearsal before coming, and he really put on a great show. As soon as he entered the door, he knelt down in front of me with a thud. "You're really the only one for me," I nodded expressionlessly. "Well, the other 8 have all been exposed. It's time for the 9th shadowy lover, me, to make an appearance." "No, it's not like that. Those were all misunderstandings." Dennis crawled on his knees all the way up to me, hugged my thigh, and started crying, subconsciously. I grabbed his hair and pulled him away, and then gave him a kick to send him further away, so as not to get contaminated by his filthy self. After this smooth series of actions, I felt a bit regretful. All of those just now were nothing but instinctive reactions of my body. If I wanted to set a trap for him, I still needed to act a bit. Misunderstandings. Are you sure those were all misunderstandings? What on earth am I to you, one of your many babies? Or an invisible baby, who doesn't even deserve to have a name? As I spoke, my voice turned into a sob, and a few tears welled up in my eyes. Seeing this, Dennis immediately panicked. It wasn't that he felt sorry for me, he was just anxious about how to deceive me. Sure enough, what he said next was all explosive news. Those women were all introduced to me by Eloise. Some of them were fans with extremely good financial conditions, and some were connections who could help introduce resources. "You're different from them. Over the years, you've already become like family to me. You're my sister, you're my only sister." Hearing these same words again in this new life, I still felt a bit overwhelmed, seeing that this little yellow duck had pretty much spilled the beans and that I had collected enough video footage. I began to move on to the next step, stripping him of his equipment. "Sister believes in you, and sister will definitely stand by your side. Do you remember? I said that I would always accompany you on the road to success." I suppressed my nausea and recalled the nonsense I had said when I was young and ignorant, while still maintaining a sincere expression on my face. When misfortune reaches its limit, good fortune is at hand. When good fortune reaches its limit, misfortune follows. Think carefully, this might actually be an opportunity. Looking at Dennis's confused expression, I knew that this uneducated guy definitely didn't understand the first half of the sentence, so I tried to deceive him in a more straightforward way, leaving other things aside. "This is the first time you've been on the trending list, right? Didn't Eloise say that to become popular, you have to use any means necessary? Being infamously popular is also a form of popularity, in my opinion. You should seize every opportunity and use all means possible to make yourself stand out while this heat is still on." Dennis's eyes immediately lit up. I knew that this fool must have been tempted. Under Eloise's daily influence, he was most susceptible to this kind of talk. "If I were you, I would invest all the funds I have on hand, including real estate and everything else, and liquidate them all. Find the best public relations team and use the shortest time possible to whitewash your image and create momentum. Go all in and take a gamble." Since I wanted to strip him of his equipment, I naturally had to do it thoroughly. To ease Dennis's concerns, I took the opportunity to comfort him. "What are you afraid of, anyway? I'll be with you. This is the key to my house. I'll be your backup." After this complete set of coquettish acts and empty promises, Dennis was neatly maneuvered. I want him to bet everything, and then watch all his efforts go down the drain, and finally have no choice but to go to the safe haven that I carefully prepared for him. I have endured that pain, and he must pay it back double. Not a single step can be missed. "Sister, you're really too good to me, and I have nothing to repay you with, otherwise." Right now, as Dennis spoke, he started taking off his clothes. This was something I didn't expect. I wanted to strip him of his equipment. But not this kind of equipment. I have no interest in this little yellow duck, and I don't care about those few seconds either. So, I quickly stopped his indecent behavior and sent him away. "There are all the fans and paparazzi outside. We're not in a hurry right now. You go and take care of your business first. Sister is waiting for your good news." After pushing him out the door, my world returned to peace. I let out a sigh of relief and started exporting the surveillance videos and finishing the editing. At the same time, the community security guard also sent me a message: "Beauty, we've already put the things back in your house and arranged them neatly, item picture, JPG. I replied briefly and then fell asleep. Tomorrow, there are still 2 tough battles to fight. 7. Because I had been too busy running around before. When I woke up again, it was already 2:30 p.m. I went home and first checked the supplies. I found that the things had filled the entire room. Then I went upstairs to check the progress of the project. I have to say that, driven by self-interest, human potential is limitless. The foreman came over excitedly to take credit and showed me around while explaining, "I don't think it will take until tomorrow. It can be completed tonight. Don't worry about the quality." I was watching them do it. After walking around, I could see that they had really put in a lot of effort. The rooftop part was all done, and the planting area and the breeding area were clearly divided. The platform had been set up, and all that was left was to fill it with things. I first went to the vegetable market and bought a lot of live fish, and then I went to pick some seedlings and seeds that were easy to grow. By the time everything was properly arranged, it was already approaching evening. I turned on my phone, and the first news that popped up was about Dennis. Shocking reversal. Depressed idol was framed. Then, there were all kinds of hashtags, comprehensively whitewashing Dennis. And there were many high-profile scenes among them. "Look, this is the 3 Good Student Award certificate that Dennis received in the 1st grade of primary school. Certificate, JPG, my God, Big Brother is so excellent. Doesn't this prove that he is an upright and honest person? Such an excellent person is now being cyberbullied and has suffered depression. I want to ask those who framed him, can you have a clear conscience? Depression medical record, JPG, so heartbroken. The beautiful, strong, and miserable persona is amazing." I watched this performance expressionlessly. Rather than believing it was the work of brainless fans, I was more inclined to think that these were paid trolls. Dennis, an unpopular celebrity, didn't have many fans in the first place. Only paid trolls would still try to establish a persona at this time. Anyway, Dennis must have spent a lot of money and risked everything on this gamble. Looking at the rising popularity, I didn't need to guess to know that Dennis must be extremely happy now and would most likely celebrate all night with Eloise. I sincerely wish them joy at this moment. After all, the first step to falling from heaven to hell is to send him to heaven first. At 10:30 p.m., the project was finalized. After seeing the construction workers off, I quickly called Aubrey. First, I confirmed the progress of her security and stockpiling work. Then I told her the whole story and asked her to help send out the video that I had recorded and edited in the hotel around 12:30 p.m. The next day. This girl is involved in the fan circle and is quite familiar with people in the media, so it's most suitable to leave it to her. After ending the call, I started setting up hidden monitoring and listening devices in this house. I attached great importance to my entertainment life in the apocalypse, so I set them up very carefully. Then, in the middle of the night, I became a hard-working little bee and used a cart to transport all the supplies to the 11th and 12th floors. After going through all this, I was completely exhausted. I set an alarm for 12:30 p.m. and fell asleep. I want to be the first to get the scoop tomorrow. 8. At 12:30 p.m., I groggily got up, turned on my phone, and started to seriously follow the gossip. Currently, the news of the agent Eloise strongly whitewashing her artist is still on the trending list. In the video, Eloise said angrily that she would pursue responsibility and sue those who slandered Dennis to the end. Before long, the news of Dennis kneeling and apologizing shot up to the top of the trending list. In the video, Dennis was crying bitterly, not only admitting everything but also incidentally revealing clearly and distinctly the fact that Eloise had been pimping for him. These 2 videos, one before and one after, formed a strong contrast and a sharp comparison. For a while, even the memes section of a certain website was in an uproar, and all kinds of creations kept emerging. I knew that Dennis's acting career was over, and Eloise's professional career was also over, but this wasn't the end. The more exciting part is always in the next second. My phone vibrated. As expected, it was a call from Dennis. "Are you fucking crazy? Huh? He's really a roaring king. I have nothing now. You want to ruin me, you want to kill me. I give full marks to this prediction. Where are you? Are you at home? You just wait for me. Good. His tendency towards domestic violence has also been revealed. I'm telling you, it's over between me and Dennis, and you won't have a good time either. Huh, this time it was Eloise's voice. What a perfect example of a husband and wife echoing each other. I calmly hung up the phone and stood by the window on the 11th floor, waiting. Sure enough, it didn't take long for the figures of Dennis and Eloise to appear. They were aggressive and obviously hadn't been influenced by the socialist harmonious wind at all. They didn't pay any attention to spiritual civilization, and their swearing scared away several children. After watching them enter the building, I changed the viewing angle and went back to the computer desk to start watching the indoor surveillance. Dennis had the key that I gave him personally, so he naturally rushed into the house without any scruples. Unfortunately, he found nothing. After venting for a while, he and Eloise couldn't find anything. After Dennis called me several times and I refused to answer, he took Eloise and tried to leave, but I knew clearly that they couldn't leave anymore. No one knows where the zombies came from, but I remember that the first scream I heard came from the amusement park downstairs. Even though it was 3 floors high, I could still hear it clearly, because it was a heart-wrenching fear and pain, just like what I had experienced before. 9. Dennis, did you hear any sound? Eloise grabbed Dennis, who was about to go out, and walked towards the window. I deliberately didn't close the window when I left, so they should be able to hear more clearly. The speed at which the zombie virus spread far exceeded that in the movies and TV shows I had watched before. In less than 10 minutes, downstairs had turned into a living hell, bloodthirsty and crazy zombies, panicked and fleeing crowds, and continuous transformations. Thinking about it again, I couldn't help but tremble. I curled up my body and sat in front of the computer desk, watching as Dennis and Eloise changed from wanting to go out to firmly locking the door. Obviously, they had also realized now, going out meant only death. Eloise, what should we do? What should we do now? Downstairs. Is that a zombie? Dennis stuttered these 2 simple sentences. As expected, he was still such a coward. Always seeking help by clinging to a woman whenever something happened. Eloise was calmer than him. She closed the window and gave instructions. Go and check how much food is left in her house. With our combat power, we definitely can't get out. We can only wait for rescue. As long as we have enough food, we can get through this. Don't be afraid. There will be a way. Although Eloise said words of comfort, her voice couldn't stop trembling. A moment later, Dennis stumbled out of the kitchen, and every word he shouted revealed despair. Eloise, that woman, she emptied all the food in the house. She only left these, and they're expired. I nodded in satisfaction. Dennis had grown up and could even check the expiration date now. Good, at least he can count. After hearing Dennis's report, Eloise, who was sitting on the sofa, was silent for a moment and then suddenly spoke. Give me your phone, I want to call her. I always feel that she must know something. Half a minute later, my phone on the desk rang. This time, I chose to answer it. 10. You did it on purpose. All of this is a trap you designed. Eloise came straight to the point and made a conclusion. Did you get the news in advance? Do you know that this virus would break out? Have you already reached a safe house, or are you in a base shelter? The later speculations were a bit outrageous, but I didn't interrupt her and let Eloise keep talking nonsense. I have no obligation to explain things to them, nor do I have such kindness. But what I didn't expect was that they took my silence as acquiescence. Then, the 2 of them started an unexpected performance. There might have been some misunderstandings between us in the past. There were no misunderstandings. You deceived me, and I was deceived. It's as simple and clear as that. I believe you're a person with a conscience and won't stand by and watch someone die. You've misjudged me. I will. Back and forth. Eloise and Dennis completely lost their temper. Want to play the moral kidnapping game? It's ridiculous. In front of such people, I have no morals at all. After teasing them enough, I simply came straight to the point. What I can tell you is that this zombie outbreak will last for a long time. And that little bit of expired food you have in your hands is definitely not enough to eat. With your abilities, you won't be able to go far either. If you want to live longer, it's better to start with each other. After saying that, I hung up the phone. That dark seed originally came from their hearts. Now, I just catalyzed it a bit. 11. For the next 3 days, I refused to answer all the calls. Happily ate a small hot pot, and watched the reality show. As they came to understand the cruel truth of the apocalypse more and more clearly, the words I said eventually took root in their hearts. At first, perhaps due to years of habit, Dennis still had some respect for Eloise and called her Eloise all the time. He also tried to exchange the repayment of the little yellow duck for food. However, Eloise didn't buy it at all and directly retorted, "Save those few seconds of yours and conserve some energy. There are still many tough days ahead." In the past, Eloise always painted beautiful blueprints for Dennis. Now that she suddenly told the truth, Dennis immediately became angry. "I'm an artist, I should definitely be given priority. Eloise, don't you forget that you're still counting on me to make money." Eloise is good at making empty promises but will never believe them herself. She is more realistic than anyone else and retorted even more bluntly, An artist who is bad at both singing and dancing, usually useless. And even more useless in this situation, counting on you to make money. The money you've earned over the years was all obtained by deceiving women. Now that there are no other women around, don't you have the delusion of setting your sights on me?" It was obvious that they were going to completely break off their relationship. With Eloise's shrewdness, she couldn't possibly not understand the current situation. The speed at which the zombie virus spreads is simply beyond imagination. And there can't be a good solution in a short period of time. Moreover, Dennis's selfishness has already started to show, and Eloise has no reason and no possibility to tolerate him. On the first day, perhaps because they weren't too hungry, the two of them tacitly didn't touch those expired foods. However, on the second night, the clever Dennis couldn't hold back anymore. While Eloise was asleep, he actually tried to steal some food and hide it. Since the zombie outbreak, I hadn't been sleeping soundly. Now that there was an extended version of the reality show at night, I naturally couldn't miss it. What's more interesting is that I wasn't the only one who wasn't asleep. Once the trust between the two of them was broken, disputes and calculations began. While Dennis was still sneaking around as a mover, Eloise was already standing at the kitchen door with a kitchen knife in her hand. The cold light of the kitchen knife was particularly terrifying under the moonlight. The moment Dennis saw Eloise, his legs went weak. "Eloise, what are you doing?" Listening to Dennis's trembling voice, I nodded in satisfaction. That kitchen knife was something I had specially prepared. In addition, I had also prepared some other little toys. Eloise held the kitchen knife and sneered, "What do I want to do? Is it what I want to do, or what you want to do? Don't worry. These foods are all expired and won't last for more than a few days." But what about an adult? Even if the person is a bit thin and weak, the body of an adult should be enough to last for about a week, right? As the familiar words sounded again, I tightly gripped the sheet in my hand and nervously watched Eloise and Dennis facing off in the picture. 12. Peanuts, melon seeds, tea. I was in a hurry to prepare the essentials for watching the show, waiting for a killing to happen unexpectedly. Just as Eloise was approaching Dennis with the knife, there was a rustling sound coming from the front door. I switched the viewing angle and found that two security guards were actually sneaking over. This was a move I had deliberately left in the first place. They didn't disappoint me, but the timing of their appearance, well, come to think of it, Eloise probably wouldn't really kill Dennis at this moment. It wasn't that far yet, most likely. What she wanted to do just now was to scare Dennis and give him a warning. In the quiet night, all sounds seemed to be deliberately amplified. Eloise and Dennis obviously heard the sound from the front door as well. "Sister, there's someone outside. There's someone outside." "No, it might also be a zombie." "Sister, I was wrong. I was really wrong. Let's deal with the things outside first." "Okay, don't leave me behind." Dennis's character of relying on women whenever something happens probably won't change in his entire life. At this moment, his pleading was truly sincere. Eloise obviously didn't expect such an accident either. She gave Dennis a fierce glare and then carefully moved towards the door. "What are you afraid of? There's a lock. They can't get in." 3 seconds later, as if in response to her words, the lock opened. Given the current situation, it wasn't surprising that these two security guards could get the key. Moreover, I had given them the key once before when I asked them to help move the goods. "Jorge, is this the place?" "Yes, Hugo and I helped move the things together. That woman stockpiled a lot of food, and it's right here." "Then let's hurry up and get the supplies." "Are you stupid? At this time, she must be asleep. Let's kill her and just stay here." Right, the lights aren't even on, we can do it without anyone knowing. 3 seconds later, as if in response to his words, the lights came on. What does it mean when embarrassment takes embarrassment to the next level? This is it. When the two groups of people looked at each other, I finally couldn't hold back and laughed out loud. An apocalyptic comedy, this is something. 13. It was the middle of the night now. The security guard named Jorge still had blood on him, in comparison. His momentum was stronger, but Eloise here wasn't to be outdone either. She gripped the kitchen knife in her hand tightly. In this environment, if it wasn't necessary, no one wanted to get hurt, and no one dared to get hurt. There were no medicines, no medical care, and they couldn't even get out of the community gate. No matter which side got cut, it would be a tough situation. So, one side stood at the front door, and the other side stood in front of the kitchen. Each side held a weapon and a standoff ensued. Jorge, let us in, and we'll split the supplies equally. Eloise, there are no supplies, just a pile of expired food. Jorge, I moved the things in here myself. How dare you play tricks on me? Eloise, I can let you in to check. We were also deceived by that woman, but you have to promise not to hurt me. She said, not to hurt me, not to hurt us. Eloise could always make the most favorable judgment for herself in the shortest time. Without too much entanglement or pointless struggle, after saying that, Eloise stepped aside to indicate that the other party could check for themselves. At the same time, her eyes were fixed on the two men, as if she was ready to fight them desperately if they dared to break their promise. There were no desperate gamblers here, at least, those who could stand here all wanted to survive. Jorge took his subordinate and checked the kitchen. Then he rummaged through the surroundings thoroughly before confirming that Eloise wasn't lying. Damn it, Jorge kicked the table beside him in a fit of impotent rage and cursed continuously. I could fully understand his anger at this moment, the despair of all his efforts coming to nothing. Jorge, should we go back? The subordinate beside him asked in a trembling voice, looking as if he was about to cry. Go back? Have you forgotten how Hugo died? Do you still dare to go down that road again? It was obvious that the two of them intended to stay here. I nodded. Although this was a last resort, it was indeed the least risky solution at the moment. However, looking at Eloise with a gloomy expression and Dennis who was lowering his head and seemed to be thinking about something, I always felt that there was still a lot to watch in this unscripted reality show. 14. It's quite funny to say that with 4 people, 2 camps, and a 2-bedroom, 1 living room house. Dividing the rooms shouldn't have been difficult, but in the end, they each became their own masters, and no one was willing to share a room with the other. Eloise and Jorge, the two with knives, each took a bedroom. The security guard's subordinate lived in the living room, and Dennis slept in the kitchen. All the expired supplies were inventoried and placed on the balcony. The use of food every day had to be approved by the two with knives. It was quite democratic, compared to their difficult days. My life was much more comfortable during this period of time. Besides watching the show, I also started to cultivate seedlings and learn 2 recipes: protein, vitamins, minerals. I couldn't lack any of the things my body needed, especially recently. I also started to learn Pilates, yoga, and do aerobics. Accidentally, I developed a 6-pack, with good physical health and a happy mood. I occasionally wrote some notes to cultivate my sentiment. By the way, I was looking forward to the development of the reality show's plot later. Their supplies were limited, and the harm of the expired food was very obvious on Dennis. His constitution was originally not good, and after eating those things, he had to run to the toilet frequently. Moreover, without medicine, he looked sick all day long. Eloise had completely ignored him, and the 2 security guards looked down on this useless guy even more, only finding him dirty and smelly. As for why they still kept him, I guessed that most likely, they regarded him as a kind of supply reserve. Before reaching that point, we all wanted to retain a bit of humanity. When it really came to that point, everyone would make their own choice between humanity and survival. I originally thought that Dennis's ending would be the same as mine, but after thinking about it carefully, although it was said to be the same, there were still some differences after all. The turning point of the matter occurred on the 8th day. 15. In my previous life, I didn't live long enough, so I didn't know that the country brought hope. Supplies distribution. The night before the supplies distribution, there was a special broadcast. China will not give up. The country will not give up on anyone. Hope is still here. we are still here. These simple 3 sentences made countless people burst into tears. Then, it was the information about the supplies distribution points. The distribution time, and the items to be distributed the next day. It was concise and straightforward. I watched as Eloise and Jorge put down the knives that were raised towards Dennis on the surveillance screen, and my heart was unusually calm. He would have his own ending, if not now, then in the future. In fact, it was just as I thought. This future didn't even have to be far away. It was tomorrow. The supplies couldn't be delivered to the front door of every household, generally. A more suitable point would be selected within a certain area for distribution. For the supplies distribution in our community, the nearest one was on the street about 500 meters away from the community. 500 meters, in the past, was nothing at all, but now, it was very likely the distance between life and death. You two go to the supplies point to get the supplies. And Eloise and I will lie in wait in the community. We'll have a two-pronged approach so that we can get more supplies. Jorge quickly divided the tasks. These simple 2 sentences fully revealed his cunning, leaving aside the hardships of the journey to the supplies point. Just the scramble for the supplies was likely to be a fierce battle. He and Eloise lying in wait in the community had a lower risk factor, and they could also reap the benefits without doing much. The other security guard's subordinate wasn't stupid either. He immediately sensed something was wrong, but before he could say anything, Eloise stuffed a dagger into his hand. You go with Dennis. If you encounter any danger, just push him out. The knife is for you, and we'll tie him up. What are you worried about? When you bring back the supplies this time, you'll get the larger share. Dennis was like a human shield. The dagger was a self-defense weapon. And the supplies were their ward. Eloise and that Jorge really had a good cooperation. Before long, they set off together, watching the 4 people disappear one after another from the screen. I felt a bit bored and simply picked up the zombie survival manual beside me. I bought it randomly before, and now that I looked at it, it was quite interesting. Some of the things in it were true, and some were false. The spread of the zombies was real, and the fact that they could eat people was also real. But things like flying through the air, disappearing and reappearing, and running at high speed seemed a bit fantastical. Just as I was in a drowsy state, half asleep and half awake, there was a sound coming from the surveillance screen again. They were back. 16. Eloise and Jorge were the first to come back. These 2 bastards obviously had robbed the supplies that others had finally obtained. They were carrying a lot of bags, big and small, and there was still blood on them. Aren't we going to wait for them? What if they need our support? Should we go down again? Obviously, Jorge still had a bit of affection for his subordinate. Wait. It's been more than 2 hours for a distance of 500 meters. Do you think they can still come back? This batch of supplies is enough. If you want to take the risk, go by yourself. Okay, then we won't take the risk. Jorge did have a bit of affection for his subordinate, but only a bit, not much, however, to everyone's surprise. More than 10 minutes later, the front door was actually knocked on. Standing outside the door was Dennis. Dennis had a huge machete in his right hand, with some pieces of meat hanging on it, and in his left hand were 2 big bags filled with food. I have food and medicine, let me in, and I can survive. I didn't know what Dennis had experienced during this period of time, but at this moment, he seemed to have changed into a different person, like a demon. Eloise and Jorge were obviously taken aback by his appearance, but the temptation of the supplies was just too great. I don't know how long this hellish life will last. Who do you plan to send to get the supplies next time? Let me in, I'll help you get the supplies. You take good care of me, let me sleep in a room, and give me priority for food and medicine. At this time, what they were afraid of wasn't that Dennis was setting conditions, but that he wouldn't set conditions. Sure enough, as soon as Dennis said this, Eloise's eyes lit up, and she even nodded at Jorge, indicating that he should agree. As the door was opened, I let out a deep sigh. Being too clever backfired on Eloise. She was indeed going to ruin herself. In this world, there was no such thing as suddenly awakened power. Mostly, it was the hatred and revenge sustained by the last breath. The moment Dennis entered the door, I saw the bite mark on the back of his neck. 17, according to past experience. It took less than 10 minutes from being infected with the virus to completely turning into a zombie. So, every moment next was going to be extremely intense, and I stared at the surveillance screen without daring to look away for a single moment. After entering the door, Dennis used his body to block the view and locked the door behind him. He swaggered into the room carrying the 2 bags of food. Before entering the room, he gave Eloise a meaningful look. Eloise understood immediately and followed Dennis into the room without saying much, leaving Jorge alone outside. Stunned, under the apocalypse, the so-called alliance was extremely fragile. After entering the room, Dennis directly threw the 2 bags of food in front of Eloise as if they were garbage. Well, now Dennis didn't need these things anymore, and no matter how much food there was, it would be a waste to him. Eloise's reaction was completely different. She had already had enough of the days when she had to carefully calculate even the expired food these days. Now, when faced with these foods, her eyes were shining. Dennis, I was wrong before. I didn't expect you to let go of the past. As Eloise spoke, she swallowed hard. Although she was speaking to Dennis, her eyes never left the food. That was the instinct of human beings, the instinct of hunger. Did you really mean it when you said you would make me famous before? Did you really mean it when you said that as long as I did those things, I could become a widely acclaimed big star? Dennis's voice had already changed a bit, but he was still trying his best to control it. Of course, how could I lie to you? Since the first time I saw you, I thought you had potential. You look good. You're good at both singing and dancing, and your acting skills are also good. Didn't I say that all you need is time? Eloise really knows how to talk differently to different people. She can effortlessly spout a stream of beautiful but empty words that cost nothing and carry no responsibility. Dennis remained silent. His eyes had turned a scarlet red, and the bloodshot lines in his eyes seemed as if they were about to burst apart. His whole body began to twitch uncontrollably. But there's no time left. As the last words were slurred and fell, Dennis suddenly pounced on Eloise. He bit and tore at her fiercely, taking chunks of flesh along with blood. Eloise didn't even have time to cry for help before Dennis brutally gnawed through her neck. That wasn't the kind of strength a human should possess. Even through the surveillance screen, the cruel and terrifying process of his devouring made me gasp in horror. 18. When I had calmed down and dragged my weak body out of the bathroom, Dennis was already half sitting on the bed. He deliberately exposed a large part of his chest and looked at me suggestively. In his understanding, Uran guessed that Dennis most likely gave all the food to Eloise. His greed for supplies was no less than anyone else's, so naturally, he couldn't accept such a situation. After knocking on the door several times, Jorge simply kicked the door and burst in. Then, there was silence. There was still blood and flesh at the corner of Dennis's mouth, and he had a soul-stirring stare with Jorge. Eloise at his feet no longer looked human. The sounds of screams and curses came from the room again. The knife in Jorge's hand slashed at Dennis repeatedly, and finally, it struck his head on the last attempt. However, even though Dennis fell, it was already too late. The bite marks on Jorge's body destined his end. The person who had originally come to this room intending to kill and rob the goods ultimately didn't manage to leave this room. I silently turned off the surveillance, feeling an unparalleled sense of calm inside. 19 months later, the broadcast about rebirth came. The surviving people walked out of their houses to welcome the rising sun after this great disaster. As soon as the communication was restored, I called my best friend Aubrey at the first opportunity. Unfortunately, the situation on her side was still not optimistic. This time, the zombie virus spread globally. Our country was the first to win this war. Besides protecting the surviving people of our country also generously shared the experience and methods of resisting the zombie virus. When conditions permitted, our country also sent support to some other countries. Another month and a half later, a reagent specifically targeted at the zombie virus was developed. This was a victory for all mankind, and no one didn't cheer and rejoice for it. When I talked to Aubrey again, we both cried. It was a kind of joy of having survived the disaster and a gratitude for being able to have each other in the future. After making an appointment with Aubrey for the time to meet, she also asked me about things related to Dennis. I've always had nothing to hide from Aubrey, so I told her the key points. After hearing it, Aubrey also let out a sigh. However, no matter what happened in the past, every day in the future is brand new. Sometimes death can teach us to cherish life even more.